13 after the murder of Trayvon Martin and the acquittal of George Zimmerman, we have to see that movement in a larger historical context. Black Lives Matter actually started in the pre-Civil War years. If you look at the speeches, the activities of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth, they were all echoing this theme, Black Lives Matter, in the late 19th century. John E. Bruce, Henry McNeil Turner, others were speaking to this same theme, Black Lives Matter, early 20th century. Ida B. Wells in her crusade against lynchings were talking about black lives and how they matter and how black bodies should be preserved. And so in the 1950s and 60s, you get Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. talking about the sacredness of human personality and black lives. So what you have with the Black Lives Matter movement today is a movement that represents, I think, a continuation of centuries of freedom struggle. It's a part of that unbroken tradition of black struggle. And so we have to understand it, I think, in that larger historical context. Although the movement started in 2013, it's a part
that is the idea, and that's why you call it the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, because it's really a continuation in a real sense, but it's now contemporary.
Yeah, it's contemporary. It's both contemporary and a continuation of this long history of struggle, and so we have to see it in those terms.
And all those individuals who were concerned about any deprivation against the black population, especially the male. Is there something that is peculiar, Dr. Baldwin, when we talk about this movement dealing with young African-American males? Why is it, where does a male fit into these movements?
I think it's really about vigilanteism. We know that Trayvon Martin was killed by a vigilante, and the movement started with an emphasis on that. But in time, it blossomed to include this idea of police misconduct and police brutality, which occurred, of course, in the case of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And later with Eric Garner in New York, with Jordan Davis, of course, you had vigilanteism in Florida with Jordan Davis. And of course, you had others like Walter Scott in South Carolina, who was killed by a policeman, and Freddie Gray in Baltimore. So the movement is really focused on the killing of young black men, the intentional and systematic maiming and destruction of young black male lives. And interestingly enough, you have black women who are spearheading this movement. So that's what it's all about.
And when you look at this movement, Dr. Baldwin, and you think about the institution of slavery, I think you already mentioned that as part of the framework of the movement. When you look at this movement, it appears to me that the emphasis is on young African-American males, primarily because those are the most dangerous individuals dealing with the institution of slavery. That is, if slavery is to be overthrown, it is not the African-American female, nor the African-American older person, but it will be who? Those young African-American males. And so that's the group.
That's right. That group has always been vulnerable. It was vulnerable in the pre-Civil War years, the antebellum period, as we call it, vulnerable in the late 19th century, earlier 20th century, the civil rights movement, and even today. The systematic and intentional killing and maiming, destruction of young black men, I think, is the issue here with the Black Lives Matter movement. Not to negate the fact that black women are also victims. I think there are statistics that show that every 48 hours, some young black male, female, or child become the victim of what? Vigilante violence or police violence. So it's a movement about the sacredness of black life, about the value, the dignity of human life and black life more specifically. So it's not only about black males, but it is about black males. It's about black people and their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And I think that also, Dr. Baldwin, I'm reminded that there's such a real problem in terms of the economic situation of young African American males.
Exactly.
I think that when you look at the statistics for today,
Yeah.
you find that they represent a large element of the population whose unemployment is greater than any other area. And so not only is it the killing of African American males, but it also has an aspect in terms of their economic deprivation and their social deprivation and et cetera.
That's an excellent question. And we often forget that when we go on social media and we check out the Black Lives Matter movement, we think it's only about racial profiling and police brutality and misconduct. It's also about poverty and economic injustice. They're very much concerned. Alicia Garza and others who are heading this movement are concerned about poverty and economic injustice, about teenage pregnancy, about incarceration rates in the black community. So it's a movement about the sacredness of black life, that black people must be concerned about black lives, that they must consider black lives sacred, and that the larger society and culture should also embrace this idea of the sacredness, the dignity and worth of black human personality. That's what it's about.
Very good. And so, however you look at it, whether we're talking about the immediate destruction of a black life, or whether we're talking about a slow destruction of black life through the inability for most individuals to get work and create a situation where they are always at one another's throats and et cetera, that's all part of it. The
That's
treatment,
all a part of it.
in a real sense, of the young African American male.